Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Ted, and today's lecture is going to be about the Battle of Adwa or Adwa. And now, the Battle of Adwa was fought on March 1st, 1896, and it ended the First Italo-Ethiopian War, which itself was a part of the largest scramble for Africa. And the First Italo-Ethiopian War arose over a dispute regarding the Treaty of Uchale. The Ethiopians and the Italians, they both had differing interpretations of the treaty, and the entire firestorm was ignited when Batahagos led rebellion against Italian authorities in Aquila Guzay. And now the early portions of the war saw a lot of seesawing between Italian victories and Ethiopian victories. Most notably, the Italians scored an impressive victory at Kotit, while the Ethiopians sort of checked that victory with a victory at Amba Alagi. Now, before we actually get to the battle, I'd like to do a brief recap on the Italian and Ethiopian situations. And now, Italy in the 19th century, the 1800s, they were riding pretty high. They had recently unified under the House of Savoy, and they were modernizing very rapidly. At least North Italy was rapidly modernizing, and has in a larger part of their political ploy of announcing themselves on the world stage. They participated in the largest scramble for Africa, which involved pretty much just carving out spheres of influences and colonies in Africa. They had already begun to carve out spheres of influence in North Africa, and they had already carved out a couple of colonies in East Africa. And now the Italian battle situation on the ground, they were grossly outnumbered. They only had about 17,000 troops, and their supplies were running low. The overall battle commander, Orestes Baratieri, he actually wanted to just stall out the Ethiopians and force a retreat. And the Italian army, the Italian forces stationed in East Africa, they contain a few elite troops, but overall they were comprised of just raw conscripts, really farm boys with little to no military training, and they really didn't have any sort of working knowledge about the terrain of the land that they'd be fighting in. And now the Ethiopian situation. Ethiopia also had just recently unified after a couple of centuries of disunity. The current ruler, the Emperor Menelik II, he was actually a great modernizer. He believed firmly in acquiring the knowledge of the industrialized powers and bringing it into Ethiopia so that his nation could present itself better on the world stage. And Menelik had assembled a large army to defend his state. The estimates are very high. Some people say that the army ranged between 70 and 120,000 men. However, because Ethiopia had recently unified after a long period of disunity, those forces were not Menelik's personal army, but rather a coalition forces from all the made up of his troops, his personal troops, but also the personal troops of the traditional rulers of Ethiopia. And as far as the fighting strength of that army, is estimated that their fighting strength really wasn't over about 60 or maybe even 50,000 men. Again, that personal army, it doesn't really reflect the fighting strength, but rather the people that Menelik and his subordinate rulers, his vassals, brought together, and that number would include a lot of personal retainers, not so much as fighting men, as I said before, but rather butlers and servants and some slaves. And as far as their armament, the Ethiopian army, they had some modern weapons, but for the most part, the army was made up of men who still fought with traditional weapons like lances and swords and spears. One great advantage that the Ethiopian army did have was because they were an Orthodox nation, because the Ethiopians practiced Orthodox Christianity, they fostered a special relationship with the Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire had sent military officers to aid in the training and implementation of new discipline standards for the new Ethiopian state. And now the Italians. For the Italian battle plan, I should say, their battle plan was pretty simple. They were to take up 3 parallel positions on the crest of a mountain and simply and simply used their crossfire to decimate the Ethiopian advances. As I said, their supporting crossfire would, in effect, create a decimating front that would simply annihilate the Ethiopians, pretty much just shooting fish in a barrel. However, during their march, the three lead brigades became separated, and the leading brigade, commanded by Matteo Albertoni, had advanced all the way into the position of Ras Alula, who himself was a chief advisor to Menelik II. And now the Ethiopians, on the other hand, they had exhausted the local food supplies, and they were actually set to break camp and retreat the following day. Menelik II, it was said that he was at prayer when the news of the Italian advancing into his main position, when the news was brought to him, he was at prayer, and he immediately summoned a command of all army commanders and ordered an attack. And now the Italians, they were actually marching into their own battle plan, because the Ethiopians now, their battle plan just mirrored the battle plan of the Italians. They took a position in the Adwa Valley on the mountain crests, and they simply, as soon as Albertone's brigade got into sufficient firing range, they just began to attack. And Albertone's brigade, the lead brigade, was the first to just blunder into the trap, and they held off for about 2 hours before withdrawing after he was captured. Giuseppe Arimondi's brigade came next, and they fought off successive full frontal charges by the Ethiopians for about 3 hours, until the Ethiopians sent in the Shiwan forces, which were in reserve, and the Shiwan forces were the personal forces of Emperor Menelik, and they simply swamped the Italians and the relief force sent down. They cut them down, and the entire engagement at that point, that particular battle scene just turned into a rout. Vittorio da Bormida's brigade, which had moved up to support Albertones, had begun a fighting retreat, in which he was caught in Narrow Valley and pretty much just decimated by the Oromo cavalry. Meanwhile, the Italian reserves under Baratieri, they were caught on the slopes of Mount Bila, and they were pretty much just cut down to a man. The entire battle is estimated took 6 hours or less, and in the aftermath, between 7 and 8,000 Italians were killed, with 3,000 being taken prisoner, and an estimated 5,000 Ethiopians were killed during the engagement. During their retreat, the Italians, they actually left behind a lot of their artillery, and along with thousands of rifles and a lot of logistical equipment. After his defeat, Baratieri, he was relieved of command and actually court-martialed. He successfully beat off the court-martial case, but thereafter just lived in disgrace for his failures in defeating the Ethiopians. And for as far as the consequences for Italy, it went even further than just disciplining the battlefield commander. The Italian Prime Minister, Francesco Crispi, he actually was forced out of government. He was forced to resign. It actually, losing the battle and thusly the war, actually caused the Italian government to fall from power. Menelik II, for his part, he actually chose not to follow up his victory and actually take the Italian colonies along the coast, what we would now consider Eritrea and Somalia. He actually decided to not advance that far, and to actually allow the Italians to retreat and allow diplomacy to resume. And a lot of people have stated that this was a failure on his part. He had the ability to really just establish himself as a fierce warrior, as a defender of his native territories, and really establish a better reputation for himself on the international scene. But he rightly saw that by attacking their home, by attacking their original colonies and not sticking to its original war aim, which was basically disputing the understanding of the Treaty of Wuchale, if he invaded their colonies, then he would turn a failed colonial gamble into a nationalistic war, which could potentially have Italy drawing in their European allies to assist them in defending their colonies, and then also just dividing up Menelik's state. And that's pretty much the Battle of Adwa. the sequence of events, but the battle lived on. It actually developed a legend, and it still has a very strong legend. The Adawa would actually prove to be the first time non-European peoples really gave a crushing defeat to Europeans using European battle techniques and battle and weapons. It will be followed rather quickly after the Great Italian defeat in the First Italo-Ethiopian War. The Russian Empire would suffer what some consider the greatest defeat of a colonial power at the hands of non-European people, with their just stunning defeat at the hands of the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. Um, Ottawa will further serve as a rally point for anti-colonialists in the 20th century, and Ethiopia itself became an emblem of African valor and resistance. Uh, so there you guys have it. That's the Battle of Adwa, and as always, likes and subscribe and tell your friends about the videos.